Okay, now what we're looking at here is in this video, we're going to talk about geometry basics in talking about squares and rectangles. Okay, and in doing so, we need to talk about some of the basics and we'll talk about some similarities and some differences. So let's go ahead and draw our first rectangle. So we draw our rectangle, okay, and we're going to label it as A, B, C, and D. Okay, so some of the things that we need to know about it, okay, A, B, C, and D, is that it has four sides. Okay. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it has four right angles. Okay. So four right angles, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that gives us our basics for that. If we talk about a square, over here with a square, we have four sides. And we have four right angles. Okay, 1, 2, 3, four sides, four right angles. So that's where we talk about our similarities. And we've got a couple more similarities as well. When we talk about our opposite sides, okay, opposite sides are congruent to each other. That's this. Wow, that was the symbol for pi, not the symbol for congruency. Our symbol for congruency looks like that, a little squiggle line on top of an equal sign. And all congruent means is the fact that it's the same shape and the same size. So our opposite sides are congruent to each other, and opposite sides are also parallel to each other. So segment AB and segment DC or CD, whichever way you want to call it, are both congruent to each other, which means they're the same length, and they're parallel to each other. We could also look at segments BC and segment AD, okay, as being congruent to each other and parallel as well. They're just not all four parallel. Obviously, that would be just kind of crazy. So let's look at our square, okay? So we've got the opposite sides here. And the opposite sides, 1, 2, opposite sides here and here. Opposite sides are parallel, okay? But all four sides are congruent to each other. All four sides in that. Okay, so that's where we get into our first difference. All right, most of them are similar. Four sides, four right angles. Opposite sides are parallel. Four sides, four right angles. Opposite sides are parallel. But in the square, all four sides are congruent. In the rectangle, the opposite sides, just the opposite sides, are congruent to each other. All right, let's talk about a couple of other things that are as we look at this. Our diagonals from A to C and from B to D, or vice versa, our diagonals are congruent to each other. They're the same shape, okay, and the same size, okay, and they bisect each other, okay. And you're asking yourself, what does bisect mean? Okay, I'm glad you asked. Bisect means it cuts it into two equal parts. That means that this part here, if I call this E, from B to E is, well, let's call it 3. That means D to E would also be 3. Therefore, A to E would be 3, and C to E would be 3. That means it cuts it into 4 equal parts. Okay, 4 equal parts with that. So as we look at our square, okay, diagonals not only bisect each other, because we can go from here to there. Let's call these G, H, I, and J. Okay, from G to I and H to J, they are congruent to each other. They bisect each other as well. That means that these would be 2, 2, 2, and 2. Okay, and one more additional, okay, diagonals. Sorry, spelling's not my forte. Diagonals also create right angles. Okay, so this becomes 4 right angles all the way through here. Okay, so they're perpendicular to each other. And this is the symbol for perpendicular. So that's the symbol for congruent. That's the symbol for parallel. Looks like an 11, but it's just 2 lines that are right next to each other. All right, and this one is the symbol for perpendicular. It's 2 lines that come together and creating right angles as we move forward with that. Okay, so those are the main similarities and differences when we talk about rectangles and squares. Okay, similarities and differences. 4 sides, 4 right angles for both of them. Opposite sides are congruent and parallel. Okay, our diagonals are congruent to each other in each of them. The diagonals bisect each other in each of them. But then we start talking about a couple of their differences. The rectangles, the opposite sides are congruent, whereas the opposite sides in the square are all of the sides are congruent. Okay, and when we talk about our diagonals in a square, they not only are congruent, they are bisect each other, but they are also perpendicular, whereas they would not necessarily be in a rectangle. All right. And that's so one of the things that we talk about, and you'll hear it said more than once, is that a square is just a special kind of rectangle because there are so many similarities between these two shapes. All a square is a special rectangle. All squares, you probably want to write this part down. All squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. I'll repeat that. All squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. Okay? Hope this helps. Have a great day.